Well, welcome to the Thought for the Day for Saturday, the 9th of May. You will have noticed that there wasn't a Thought for the Day yesterday. That wasn't because I was absent of thoughts. It's just that the day and its business took over, as it sometimes does. And it's always sometimes good to have a rest day, a Sabbath, as it were. Even when we're talking about something as fantastic as Franciscan spirituality. Today and over the next few days, I'm going to delve into the understanding of the mystical life and Christian mysticism, and how Francis himself, I believe, falls within that tradition of Christian mystics. And today I'm going to just give a bit of an overview of what I mean by Christian mysticism and mysticism as a whole, because mysticism is often found in most of the major world religions, and perhaps more so and more celebrated in perhaps the Eastern traditions and religions, whereas in many ways, especially in the Protestant West, Christian mysticism and the mystics have been looked with some skepticism and have been sometimes rejected. I would consider Francis falling within the tradition of great Christian mystics. However, I also consider that Jesus himself and St. Paul and St. John, at least, all fell into that what I would class as the mystical tradition. They came out of the mystical tradition within Judaism, which has carried over into the Christian expression. You only have to read books like Colossians to really get a sense that Paul had a mystical understanding of the nature of things and the wholeness of everything. And Jesus himself, was definitely within that particular wisdom and mystical tradition. So what is mysticism, and particularly Christian mysticism? Well, when we say that someone is a Christian mystic, and Francis isn't the only one that we as the church recognize within that tradition. People like St. Teresa of Avila, St. John of the Cross, Brother Lawrence, Julian of Norwich, Teresa of Lisieux, all those and more, Thomas Merton, all fall in these traditions within the mystical tradition. And what sets particularly those people apart from the rest of us who may engage in the Christian mystical tradition, but may not necessarily consider ourselves Christian mystics? And perhaps actually that's one of the criteria for becoming, is that actually other people recognize you as a Christian mystic, as more than actually you do yourself, because you understand your own internal struggles, and that you haven't even come close to becoming one with God in the way that you seek to. But what does sort of echo across all of those different people is that they tend to have had a profound experience of God and the presence of God that has completely altered their way of understanding the world from that moment onwards. Some of you listening to this may well have had that type of experience, where you have encountered God and the presence of God in such a way that the whole understanding that you had before has been completely taken away, and a new understanding has taken root, and all you can do is go and try and express and live out the new revelation you've had of God's presence, and then try to explain it to others. And I say try to explain it to others is because actually often the mystical experience, the transformational experience or conversion experience that they encountered was such that actually human language has no real impact or has no real way of expressing what they've experienced. So they really struggle for metaphors and things that connect. And in some respects, they are just fingers pointing to the moon and saying, look, I can only take you so far in order to really understand what I'm on about. You have to be open to that type of experience as well. But they are ones that what the Christian mystics do show us is that actually in their normalness, Francis was just a normal guy. All of us have, if we open ourselves to that, have the potential to experience the same sort of mystical experience as they did, and to experience God in such a presence that it completely alters our way of thinking and looking at the world and each other. It impacts on everything. So that's really how I see who a Christian mystic is someone who's had such a profound experience of God. Well, look at St. Paul. Everyone talks about the Damascus Road conversion experience. Well, the Christian mystic is someone who may well have been a Christian from infancy. However, at some point within their Christian journey, has had that sort of mystical experience in that they've met so powerfully with the Christ that it has opened their eyes and altered completely the way they see the world. And then they try and pass that on to the rest of us. And Francis is one of these people. In Brother Ramon's book, he talks about the mystical life, and he talks about there are 3 types of mysticism. Now, whether that's an exhaustive, but from his observations, he sees that there are the 3, and he does identify that they tend to overlap, and sometimes there's no real clear distinction from where one ends and the other begins. But that's the same in the Trinity. That's the same with us and our neighbor, and us and our relationship with God, where we end and God starts, or God starts and or God ends and we start, is part of that relationship of being drawn into the Trinitarian relationship that all Christians are. So he identified these 3 as nature mysticism, person mysticism or soul mysticism, and he also then talked about God mysticism, which obviously God mysticism really does permeate through the other 2. Nature mysticism largely is about the fact that we experience God in nature, and we have that, when you look back and you see a child engaging in nature and that wow moment, that wonder, that awe, well, how does, look at this, and that discovery of new things within nature. If you see children playing in a creek or a brook and doing dab netting, and then looking at all the interesting little creatures that they've been able to net in their little dab net, there's an endless fascination. And nature, someone that engages in that nature mysticism is someone that continues to try and maintain that awe and wonder at nature, and are endlessly fascinated and learning and discovering the new. Many of our botanists and biologists and scientists are people that may not necessarily identify in this way, but they are maintaining that childlike fascination. And we see that in a lot of the poetry of Shelley and Wordsworth. And I'm going to read one of Wordsworth's poems about his lament of losing some of that childhood wonder at nature. And looking back at that short space, could see a glimpse of his bright face, when on some gilded cloud or flower, my gazing soul would dwell an hour, and in those weaker glories spy some shadows of eternity. Before I taught my tongue to wound my conscience with a sinful sound, or had the black art of dispense a several sin of every sense, but felt through all this fleshy dress bright shoots of everlastingness. And so I encourage you to seek after this awe and wonder and fascination with nature once more. And this soul or person mysticism is about understanding the depths of ourselves, that finding that the deeper we go into ourselves, the closer we find God. A bit like Teresa of Avila, she was one that talked about the inner castle, that the deeper you go into oneself, into your being, then actually the closer you find God, because God is right there at the deepest part of your being. Not to try and find God and the mystical experience out there, but you can actually find God most closely within you. And many of the Christian mystics have found that actually by delving deeper into oneself, they've been able to, ironically or paradoxically, find a more expansive relationship with everyone. It may seem selfish and navel-gazing, but actually it opens oneself to a deeper experience of God and relationship with other people. And God mysticism is similar to both of those, that it's identifying that God is the source with which all things are created and sustained. And in the Christian mystical tradition, as Brother Lawrence says, there is no loss but an enhancement of individuality in the fuller and deeper communion with and in God. It's the process of deification and union, a participation in the very life of God. The term theosis or divinization. Sorry, I can't speak this morning. Is used in the Eastern Church. So they have very much this idea that we become more and more godlike, Christ-like, as the more we enter into the life of God and the Trinity, the more we become in God's likeness, which is our first creation in the first place. And they call that theosis. And it's that understanding, that this yearning that we're not fully ourselves outside of this living presence. So I'm going to leave it there for today. And then I'm going to talk a bit more about the Franciscan experience of mysticism and the gospel tomorrow.